Hello, and welcome to Ben and Matt Watch Game of Thrones.
Brought to you by the sci-fi-christian.com. Matt, though, you're kind of wrong on what you just said.
I know, but that's what we call the show.
It's not Ben and Matt Watch Game of Thrones. It's Ben reads Dance with Dragons.
Yes, so this video
A little bit different.
will be a little different, and eventually, maybe in our next video I'll have more to say because I can talk about Game of Thrones, the book.
Yeah, because you're listening to it right now.
I'm listening to it as we speak.
And are you enjoying it?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Very good.
Definitely, really good stuff.
Ben, you finished
I finished it yesterday.
Dance with Dragons yesterday.
Yeah, all 958 pages of it.
So
it's a monster.
You can't tell me anything about it because I am years behind. I'm not going to be able to read this until after.
Yeah.
I don't even know what year.
A long time.
Let's see. Today is 2011. Next year will be
maybe
a class.
They'll cancel the show and
Next year will be a class of Kings. Will be 2012. Then what's number
Storm
3?
of Swords.
Storm of Swords. 2013.
I have no idea how they will do Storm of Swords in one season.
What's next after that?
Feast for Crows, which takes place simultaneously with this, so maybe they'll do. I don't know how they'll do it. The series gets really unfilmable.
Gosh, I will not be able to read this until 2015.
Hey, maybe the next book will be out by then. We can hope.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So, like you said, I can't say anything about it while you're here, but in a few seconds, you're going to leave, and the video is going to cut to just me talking about Dance with Dragons, and spoiler alert, full spoilers, and I hope this goes without saying, but not only for this book, but for the entire series. So if you have not read any of the books, or have not read through this one, I will be going full spoilers. Consider yourself warned.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to not watch this.
Yeah.
I mean,
are you going to watch this in 5 years?
In 5 years.
All right.
All right, well.
Let me know what you think then, okay?
I hope we're still friends then.
I really value your feedback,
All
so
right.
if you could let me know if I did a good job in 5 years, that'd be great.
All right, well, I'll see you later.
Alrighty. So let's start this with me just giving some general impressions on the book, and then I want to dive into specifics on some of the different characters and some of the stuff that we find out along the way, and maybe talk about some of the different theories that are going to come up from the new information that came in Dance with Dragons. But general impression of the book, really, really enjoyed it. I gotta say, and again, just one final warning, full spoilers on Dance with Dragons in this review. I gotta say, I am a little bit disappointed that we're still in Meereen with Dany. I was really hoping that by the end of this volume, I knew she was going to be over there probably for most of the book, especially since George R.R. Martin's talked about the Meereenese not referring to all the trouble he's had with writing the sections in that city. So I knew we were going to have a lot in Meereen. But if there's one thing I was really disappointed about in the book, it's that we never got to the point where Dany is going to Westeros, and I was okay with all of her. I gotta stay here. I gotta do my stuff. I can't leave the city in bad hands. All of that stuff. But I wanted to see her by the end of the novel either be on her way to Westeros or be resolved that that's what she's now going to go do. And I'll talk about the final chapter with her, where we maybe got a little bit of that, but for the most part, that wasn't there. And that was really my one huge disappointment with the novel. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. It's a huge disappointment in the sense of just having finished the book and waiting 5.5 years to read this. I do think that when all is said and done and the series is complete, I'm sure that Martin knows what he's doing and will look at his timing in terms of getting Dany to Westeros, assuming that's where she eventually winds up, which I'm still thinking is the case, and he'll know what he's doing. But for right now, it's a point of frustration in terms of just having read this book. But beyond that, I really loved the book. I thought it was fantastic. I want to talk briefly about Feast for Crows because you really can't talk about these two books separately. Feast for Crows, I know a lot of people were disappointed about, and a lot of people are talking about this is a return to form for George R.R. Martin. And I agree with that to a point. I like Feast for Crows a lot. It's the weakest volume in the series, but I don't hate it in the way that some people do. I think some people have even implied that somebody other than Martin wrote it or that it feels like a different author wrote it, and I don't get that at all. I think the biggest criticism you can make about Feast for Crows is that it feels really, really incomplete, and part of that is not having half the characters there. That didn't ever disappoint me about the book because I knew it was going to be like that going in. I followed Martin on his blog, so that really wasn't a surprise. And then the other part is that there's really no huge payoff or any big cliffhanger moments at the end. And we get some minor character cliffhangers, but there's nothing like Battle of the Blackwater. We never get a Red Wedding moment in Feast for Crows, or in this volume, Jon Snow maybe dying. We'll talk about that a little bit later, what I think is probably going on there. I don't think he's actually dead. But we never get anything like that in Feast for Crows, and that's why I think the volume stands out as maybe a bit weaker than the others. However, what I love about Dance with Dragons is that it actually makes Feast for Crows a better book. And the two, for the most part, take place chronologically. I think that probably about the first 500 to 600 pages of Dance with Dragons are in the same timeline as Feast for Crows, and then timeline advances and we get a couple of Cersei chapters and a couple of Arya chapters and a Jaime chapter, so a couple of those characters come back who are in Feast for Crows. But what I love about Dance with Dragons is that it makes what is definitely the weakest volume in the series, even coming from somebody who likes it, it makes that book a lot better. Because all of a sudden we get the rest of that volume. This doesn't feel like book 5 to me. This feels like the rest of book 4. And in fact, when I reread it, which I'm going to do, I actually want to read Feast for Crows at the same time as Dance with Dragons and see if I can either find online or work out some sort of chapter reading order. Because they're really the same book. These aren't two separate books. They're the same book. And if you look at Feast for Crows that way as a part of Dance with Dragons, or vice versa, Dance with Dragons as a part of Feast for Crows, I think the weaknesses in both volumes and some of that feeling of being incomplete that will come with both volumes really disappears. So in my mind, one of the best things about this book is what it does for Feast for Crows and how we really kind of have one huge and awesome volume 4 in these two books together, as opposed to a volume 4 that was weak in Feast for Crows, and now a stronger but still incomplete because of the lack of characters volume 5 in Dance with Dragons. I think you'll probably enjoy the two books better if you look at them as one long book, and I would encourage you to, on rereads at least, I think there's a good argument for maybe your first time through reading Feast for Crows first, but at least for rereads, I really don't see any reason to ever read them as separate volumes again. They're the same story, and they should be read together. I get why Martin did it, and I don't disagree with his decision. It was good to get, I'm glad we didn't have an 11-year wait since Storm of Swords. The 5.5-year wait was bad enough. So I get why he did it, but going forward, there's really no reason to not have these as one giant mega book. It'd be really cool if the publishers caught on to that and, would do them as an ebook at least, or part 1, part 2. I know you can't, because of binding restrictions and all that it's physically impossible to publish them in one volume. But hey, I've got a Barnes & Noble Nook, people with their Kindles, whatever. You could do this as an ebook, or even as an audiobook as one volume, and that would be a lot better if Martin would do something like that down the road. Not now. I want to be working on Winds for Winter. Now that should be the priority, but down the road it would be cool if he kind of edited these two back together somehow, or did it some way, or something like that. So those are my general impressions of the book. And now I want to talk about some of the individual characters and what we find out about them and kind of what their arcs are, because there's some really good stuff. First, I love the way that the book starts after the prologue. I'm going to delay talking about the prologue till we get to Jon, because I really think that you have to talk about it really ties into where Jon's story goes. So the first 3 chapters out of the prologue, right out of the gate, are Tyrion, Dany, Jon. I love that Martin did that. He's making a statement that all those characters who you missed in Feast for Crows are back. And I felt like that was just a really strong way to start the book, by bringing in those 3 characters. Maybe that's how he would have done it anyway. I don't know for sure that was meant to be kind of a statement to people who complained about Feast for Crows, but it certainly had that effect on me when I read it, that, okay, we're back. All these characters who we've been missing for so long, they're back. And the book's a lot better for it. Tyrion, I think, was our first chapter that we started out with, and I loved having Illyrio back. That was really cool. We haven't really seen Illyrio, I don't think, since book 1. It certainly hasn't had a major role since book 1, and if he's had a cameo here or there, I must have missed it, but this is definitely his biggest appearance since Game of Thrones. And it was really cool to see him and Tyrion interacting, and we kind of realize a little bit more of Illyrio's plot behind the scenes, though it's still not clear what his motivations are. I'm hoping that we'll see more of him in the next 2 volumes, because Illyrio is a fascinating character, and I love that Tyrion calls him out on what he's doing. Why are you invested in what's going on in Westeros? You're the Magister of Pentos. Why do you care what's going on? And he doesn't really give him a straight answer. So there's still some mystery going on with Illyrio, but it was cool to see more of him. And then Tyrion heads on down the river towards Volantis, I think is the city name that he's going towards. And he's got some interesting traveling companions. And at first I wasn't paying too much attention to his other companions, which I know is always a mistake in a George R.R. Martin novel, because there's so much subtlety and so many little clues. But I wasn't paying a ton of attention, and then all of a sudden Tyrion tells young Griff, "You are Aegon, the baby who was supposed to have been killed way back in the day by Tywin Lannister. Nope, you're still alive, and you are Prince Aegon." That blew my mind. I knew that there was a theory out there that Aegon was still alive, and that George R.R. Martin had made a couple of cryptic remarks. So I knew it was possible we were going to see him at some point, but I definitely wasn't expecting Aegon there. I went back and reread a couple of Tyrion chapters at that point, because I had obviously missed some stuff. And yeah, there's definitely some good clues there, and it was really cool to kind of see that new twist be thrown into things, completely unexpected, at least for me. I don't know what this does for us exactly. They brought up the point, at one point in the novel, at least one point, that Aegon might actually have a better claim than Dany. Now, she is his aunt, so that would make her have a better claim in some ways, but he is male, and he's Prince Rhaegar's son, and he's over in Westeros, so all of that maybe makes him actually have a better claim. So we might have some Targaryen versus Targaryen action coming up. Though I'll tell you where Dany definitely has a better claim. She has dragons. Right, and we'll get to Dany and her dragons in a bit, but she has dragons, and that puts her ahead by a long shot. So then, Tyrion eventually gets hooked up with Jorah Mormont, which was pretty cool. I love that Mormont's trying to earn his redemption for Dany, and I think that if there was any question about his motivations, it should be cleared up. It's cleared up in my mind. He genuinely does love and care for Dany. He did a stupid thing by selling her out, but he wants to make it right, so I really hope that he is able to reconnect with her, and I hope he's a little bit less of a dick towards Varis and Selmy, because that was what was driving me nuts about Jorah Mormont in Storm of Swords, is that he was just not looking at Dany's best interest at that point. He was looking at what was best for him. I hope that's gone, because I love the character. I want to see him back actually helping Dany and not just manipulating things to try and keep every other man who isn't even attracted to her away from her, because that just doesn't work for me. So hopefully Jorah's learned his lesson. And then eventually Tyrion gets sold to slavers, and by the end of the novel winds up in the Second Sons with Ben Plum, as all of Meereen is about to go to war. In terms of Tyrion's character, and I will definitely talk about this as we talk about Dany's storyline more, because they definitely tie together. I liked his character arc a lot in this one. It was great to see him back, great to see what happens, great to see him wrestling with what he does at the end of Storm of Swords. I don't like the cliffhanger. I don't mind cliffhangers. And I'll get into this again more as we talk about Dany, but I really don't like that there's really no resolution to his storyline. Cliffhangers are fine, but you have to feel some sort of sense of resolution, and I didn't get that at all with Tyrion storyline. Again, you have to look at it that this is part of a grand epic 7-volume series, so there's the long-term perspective, where is it really going to matter in the grand scheme of things? No. In terms of immediate frustration, not knowing how long it's going to take to the next volume, yeah, it's really frustrating to not have Tyrion have any sort of resolution. The other really interesting thing that comes out in Tyrion's storyline is that anytime somebody asks him about Joffrey's murder, he says that he did it. Now, he had told Jaime this in Storm of Swords, but I thought that that was just because he was angry at Jaime. I still don't think that Tyrion is actually Joffrey's murderer. I think there's a lot of evidence pointing to Littlefinger and Olenna Tyrell as being the murderers, but he's fessing up to it. And I don't know if that's just because he's supposed to be really pissed off at his family and he just wants to claim credit for killing as many Lannisters as possible. That seems to be his motivation, but I suppose it's possible that Tyrion, who in my mind really wasn't a candidate for Joffrey's murder at all going into this book, you got to give him a second look after how insistent he was that, no, I killed Joffrey. So it'd be really interesting to see where all of that goes and how the evidence plays out with that. Then, of course, alongside Dany, alongside Tyrion, I should say, we get Dany, who is in Meereen doing her thing, where she is trying to rule a city that does not want her there. Here's what I liked about this storyline, and like I said at the beginning of the review, this is the most frustrating part of the book for me. Here's what I liked. I love the moral tension that Martin draws you into, that there's no good answer here for her. She's conquered this city. What she probably should have done is just conquered, moved on. She's trying to rule, and she can't really leave without saving face. Because if she leaves, everybody's just going to come in and destroy the city. Not destroy it, but slavery's going to be back up and running again, and all the stuff she doesn't want. So if she leaves, she looks stupid, and she completely abandons all these people who she's promised her protection. So I really love the moral dilemma that she finds herself in. And that's about it. Dany really drove me nuts in this novel. And not necessarily in like I didn't like the writing sort of way, her character was just driving me nuts. I hate that she goes and puts her dragons in a pit chained up. And of course, Drogon, good for you, escapes and is gone for most of the novel, but the other two dragons are chained up in a pit. I get why she did it, that they killed a child, but Dany, these are your dragons. These are your key to everything. You're nothing without the dragons. What are you doing? And it doesn't make any sense why she would chain up these dragons. It completely drove me nuts that she does this. I really wish that she had made a different choice there. I'm still trying to decide if I'm frustrated with Martin for writing it that way, or if I'm just frustrated with the character but enjoy the writing. I'm not sure at this point. Either way, frustrating choice on Dany's part, and then she decides to marry this guy, forget his name at the moment, but he's obviously in league with the slavers, possibly even the Harpy in Meereen. He's not a good guy. She decides to marry him. That doesn't go well. There's a couple of other suitors who are arriving. Quentyn Martell, I'll talk about House Martell more in a minute, because that was really fascinating to me. And then Victarion Greyjoy is coming. So she's got a lot of people that she could marry and use to launch an invasion into Westeros, which would be the right and smart thing to do, but instead she just sticks around Meereen, marries the wrong person, ignores her dragons, ignores the advice of Barristan Selmy, who, by the way, loved his point of view chapters. I won't say too much about them because they're still kind of part of the same storyline, but really, really solid stuff there. And then eventually, where Dany finally starts to redeem herself is that the fighting pits are reopened and Drogon shows up and she rides away on Drogon. That was awesome. I love that scene. That was one of my favorite scenes in the entire novel. Completely just blew me away with how well written it was. And it was like, okay, now Dany is re-engaged with things. Or so we think. Because when we see her in the final chapter, outside of the epilogue, she's not so engaged with things. She's walking back to Meereen. And I honestly wanted to throw my book across the room. It's like, come on, stop. We've had enough of Meereen. And here I was frustrated with Martin because I wanted the writing to stop at this point in terms of making Dany be so obsessed about Meereen. It's time to move on and advance the plot and get her to Westeros. Dany gets sick with what seems to be the bloody flux, which has been, the plague's been sweeping all over Meereen and Astapor and Yunkai and all those. So she seems to be sick with that. She's on the point of death, and then Drogon shows up, and she, I believe, has a line in there, or it's in her thoughts or something, that she's abandoned her children and she knows she needs to come back to her children. And we don't really get a lot of explanation for that, but I really, really hope that things have finally clicked in Dany's mind. Get your dragons out of the pit, go to Westeros, do what you are meant to do. If you need to clean up Meereen a little bit, fine, but let's get to Westeros. You are making stupid decisions. I think that things have finally clicked for her. However, she is, at the very last paragraph, she is found by Khal Jacos, or I forget his name exactly, but a rival Khal's, Khalasar, and we're not sure where this is going to go. My sense is that she's got a dragon. If there's a fight here, she's going to win it. At least I hope that's what happens. I really, really hope that Dany isn't enslaved to a rival Khalasar for most of Book 6 and then gets back to Meereen at the end of Book 6. And no, Book 6 needs to be the end of this whole storyline of Meereen. We need to get to Westeros, and it needs to happen really soon. Final thing about Meereen is that everything's right on the verge of war. So Barristan takes down Dany's husband, basically replaces him with a council, and we end that with a cliffhanger that I thought this worked better than Tyrion's cliffhanger. We're right on the verge of war in Meereen. Good stuff's going to happen there. We should have some pretty big battles coming up at the beginning of Winds of Winter. I really hope that they involve Dany and her dragons, and that we get resolution there. And then by halfway through that book, at the very latest, we are on our way to Westeros. That would be phenomenal. And then Book 6 ends with Dany landing in Westeros. That would be my ideal way of writing it, but of course I'm not George R.R. Martin, so I completely trust him that he might have a completely different and better way of going about it. But as it stands right now, that's what I want to see. So let's talk about Quentyn Martell a little bit here. This was one of the places where I think it would work a little bit better to read Feast for Crows first before Dance with Dragons, because Doran Martell comes across as a complete weakling in Feast for Crows. And he seems really wimpy and passive. Not so fast. Now we find out that he has been scheming throughout the entire series, maybe as well as anyone. House Martell and House Targaryen have a secret marriage pact, and so he sends Quentyn to go marry Dany. It doesn't work out as he has planned, but this is a stroke of brilliance on Doran Martell's part. We find out that he and Oberyn were actually working together really closely, so it's not that Oberyn was, let's go kick the Lannisters, and Doran was, no, let's stay back and not do anything. This book, what we find out about him, casts him in a completely different light. I know that at the very end of Feast for Crows, he says that he wants vengeance and says the Targaryen house words, but there's only so much you can read into that, and now we kind of find out what his thinking actually was, and it was a really, really good payoff. So I loved Quentyn's chapters, and I'm excited to see where those are going to... I guess Quentyn's won't go so much more, but the whole House Martell storyline is going to go, and where this marriage pact's going to come up again, and there should be some pretty interesting stuff in store there. So that's kind of it for over in Meereen. Let's talk about back in the north. First of all, I want to talk about Jon last, at least for this section. Maybe last overall. So we'll talk about Bran and Theon first. Really cool Bran chapters. I was bummed that there was only 3 of them, but at the same time I loved everything that we got here. I love that we have had confirmation that the children of the forest are still out there and Bran is there with them. He's interacting with the three-eyed crow, who we find out is the last green seer, and that was so cool to get some payoff from that mystery that's been lingering since Book 1. And Bran seems to be becoming a green seer himself. He's appeared in the weirwood trees. He seems to be able to travel through time a little bit, or time works differently when he's skin changing with the weirwood trees. And that's the other thing, he develops his ability as a warg more. Bran's chapters, there wasn't a ton of stuff like I said, but it was really cool. Loved that. And then the other thing, major storyline outside of Jon taking place in the north, is Theon. And oh my gosh, this was amazing. This might have been the best part of the book, or at least the best character arc in the book. Theon doesn't go by the name of Theon, he goes by the name of Reek, and he is the captive of Ramsay Snow, who has now been legitimized and is now Ramsay Bolton. We haven't seen a whole lot of Ramsay in the previous books, just a little bit. He might be the most evil character in this entire series. This guy is sadistic, and he is to the core evil. He's really, really, really bad. We've had some bad guys in this series. There's certainly no lacking of evil characters in Song of Ice and Fire. Ramsay may very well take the cake. He along with Roose. I mean, House Bolton, it doesn't get much worse than that. We find out that Ramsay captures girls and then he looses them in the woods and goes and hunts them down and this is how he goes and has fun. He's torturing Theon. He cuts off his fingers for no apparent reason. We later find out after he marries the false Arya Stark, who we did get confirmation is in fact Jane Poole, as had been suspected for a while. He marries Jane Poole, and he's basically torturing her. This guy's as bad as they come, and I really hope he gets a very violent and very painful death scene when all is said and done, because both he and Roose Bolton have earned it. We knew Roose was bad after the Red Wedding, but there you could kind of justify that, it's politics and he's trying to make a good move and, he's playing the Game of Thrones and all this stuff. You could maybe justify what Roose Bolton does in Storm of Swords. He's still bad, but you could maybe justify it. There's no justification for Ramsay. He is 100% evil, completely despicable character in a good way. I mean, you've got to have some of these evil characters in there. I like where George R.R. Martin, how he's developed him as a really good bad guy. But Theon, I mean, man, what a turnaround from we last saw him in Clash of Kings and was completely despicable in that book, where he sacks Winterfell, betrays House Stark, basically is responsible for the downfall of the North. Complete turnaround in terms of him being a sympathetic character here. I love what George R.R. Martin did with him and taking a guy who was unlikable and not only making you feel sorry for him, but making you really care for him and cheer for him. And Theon eventually is able to do the right thing by helping Jane Poole escape, and then eventually hooking up with Stannis' host, which is camped out just a few days short of Winterfell, and may or may not be defeated, depending on how much you believe of Ramsay's letter to Jon at the end of the book. But Theon's storyline, I don't know how much more there is to say about it than that, but completely emotionally moving, really powerful section of the book. It might be some of the best stuff Martin's written. I absolutely loved it. Okay, so before we talk about Jon, I want to talk about a bit about the Feast for Crows characters come back at the end. And then we'll talk about Jon, we'll talk about the epilogue, and both those things, because that's where stuff gets really interesting. So we see a little bit of Arya. She's no longer blind, or she's blind at the beginning of her chapters, but then by the end, I think she has 2 or 3 chapters, and by the end of that, she's still doing her training, but she's advancing farther and farther. She seems to now be shape-shifting a little bit, at least that's what I inferred in my first reading. I want to read that a little bit more careful to make sure I was getting that right. But she's no longer blind. She's advanced in her training and is doing good stuff there. Cersei does her long walk of shame to make up for her crimes as she was imprisoned with the High Septon. And then we also find out more from Qyburn about his Frankenstein, Gregor Clegane type monster that exists, that he's been working on now for most of Feast for Crows. And he's called Sir Robert the Silent. Really interested to see what comes of this. I hope that it is Gregor Clegane more than not, because I want to see, and I think everybody does, the Hound versus the Mountain. We got to see that at some point in the next 2 books. That has to happen. And now that Qyburn has done the good work of resurrecting Gregor more or less, that remains to be seen. I think we can still have that epic showdown yet to take place. And then we get 1 chapter with Jaime where he's still kind of doing his thing of bringing peace to the Riverlands. And then Brienne shows up and is going to take him to Catelyn Stark. And Brienne was about to get hanged at the end of Feast for Crows. So she survives and apparently is going to bring Jaime to Catelyn. So Jaime needed an Admiral Akbar-esque warning, it's a trap, not to go with Brienne, but he, of course, doesn't have any reason not to trust her. And I'm guessing Jaime is not going to be in a very good place at the beginning of Winds of Winter. He may, in fact, be on his way to a very quick death in that book. We will see. So let's talk Jon and the epilogue. I'm going to take the epilogue first because I think Jon is maybe the more fascinating one to talk about here. Love seeing Varis. If there was any doubt about where Varis stands in terms of if he is or is not loyal to House Lannister, he's not. He kills Kevin Lannister in order to disrupt the realm. He wants Cersei back in charge because she's doing an absolutely terrible job of running things. He wants things disrupted for the Targaryens to invade. Here's though where things get really interesting with Varis. Up until now, like when we saw him and Illyrio in the dungeon in Game of Thrones and Arya was listening to their conversation, his hope seemed to be for Dany. According to what he says here, his hope seems to be for Aegon, because Aegon is the one who has not been raised with a sense of entitlement. He's been raised to put the realm first. And as Varys has always said, I serve the realm. And I do think that he is legitimate on that. I don't think that he is loyal to House Targaryen, except to the extent that he feels that House Targaryen is the best for the realm. And maybe that's why he's switching to Aegon. I'm really not sure how to make sense of Varys' earlier support for Dany and his current support for Aegon right now. Because obviously he knew about Aegon before. Aegon's not new news to Varys. He's known about this all along. Maybe he was expecting Dany to get there sooner. At the time he had that conversation with Illyrio in Game of Thrones, Khal Drogo was still alive, so I know that the original plan was for Viserys to invade with Khal Drogo. So there, I guess you could make an argument that he might be loyal to House Targaryen instead of the realm, but based on what he says to Kevin, he certainly seems like his loyalty isn't so much to House Targaryen as to the realm. So Varys' motivations start to come into focus a little bit more, but we'll still have to kind of wait and see how all that fleshes out. Really interesting, though, in terms of where that's going. And then also Grand Maester Pycelle and Kevin both die in that chapter. So Grand Maester Pycelle, you know, he always seemed like he was up to something. We're never quite sure where he stood with everything, or, you know, he was loyal to the Lannisters, but did he have his own plot along the side? Maybe he did. We'll not find out about it, or at least if we do, it won't be sort of his character directly, because he's dead now. And so is Kevin, and kind of sucks for Kevin. If there's one Lannister who's kind of likable and seemed to actually be a decent person, it was Kevin Lannister. You know, he obviously went along with a lot of what Tywin did, but he wasn't evil in the way that Tywin was. And now Kevin's dead. So one more Lannister bites the dust. Cersei, I presume, is going to be back in charge as the regent. That would be my assumption anyway. If not, we'll see what happens. But certainly Varys is under the impression that whatever happens next, the realm's going to be thrown back into chaos, and it will be ripe for the picking for whichever Targaryen does in fact wind up invading. Aegon is already over in Westeros, and Dany needs to get her act together soon. Aegon will go do his thing, but Dany has dragons. She's going to be the Targaryen who wins the day. I don't think there's really much doubt about that. Okay, so Jon. And talk briefly about Melisandre. First of all, let me just touch on her briefly. She had one point of view chapter, and it was really cool to see her have a little bit of self-doubt come in, where she's always seems so sure of herself and so confident. When we actually get her point of view, there's a lot of self-doubt in terms of how she's going about things, and that was really fascinating to me. Other thing I liked about her is that, just like with Theon, how Martin's taken an unlikable character and made her likable, I really like what he did with her in this novel. I mean, she's kind of seemed evil before. She's practicing blood magic and recommending child sacrifice and all this bad stuff. We don't like her in the previous novels. However, I gotta say, here's my reading on Melisandre at the moment. Her actions and what she's recommending are evil, and they are wrong, and I'm glad that Stannis has thus far not done child sacrifice or anyone else. Human sacrifice, not good. However, her motivations are right. She is trying to stand against the others, and she might know what's going on with the others better than anyone else does. So what she does is evil, but her motivations are good, and she's trying to do the right thing, and she's trying to protect the realm. Very complex character, and that's what you love about the series, right? Is how complex these characters are, how they do the wrong thing, but they do it for the right reasons, or they do the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. Loved how that side of her character and that sympathetic and good-natured side of her got fleshed out in this volume. So Jon's ruling the wall, and he's pissing off a lot of people doing it. He is... he's doing what he needs to do, though. I mean, he's bringing in the wildlings. He's saying, look, we don't have enough people to stand against what's coming. We need the wildlings. And so he's making all these deals with them, much to the disgust of several people on the wall, including his steward, Bowen Marsh, and Jaina Slint at the beginning. I loved Jon executing Jaina Slint, by the way. And I love that he did it in the Stark manner. The one who passes the sentence should wield the blade. That was a great moment. And I'm glad Jaina Slint is dead. I wish he would have taken Alistair Thorne along with him, but I'm sure that death will be up and coming. So Jon's chapters were good. They weren't my favorite part of the book because it seemed like Jon was just... They got a little repetitive, Not in a bad way. I mean, I get that he's building stuff up and all of that, but a little bit repetitive, where Jon makes a deal with somebody or with the wildlings, or he's making some sort of political move on the wall, pisses off Bowen Marsh and everyone else, all leading up to the climactic final scene where Jon is stabbed in Julius Caesar-esque fashion by Bowen Marsh and several others. Okay, Jon's not dead. I know a lot of people are complaining that, oh, Martin just killed another main character. Well, okay, a couple things on this. Number one, if you don't expect Martin at this point to kill main characters, you haven't been paying attention. I know people have been, I've read a lot of reviews on Amazon and comments on forums and all of that, and there's been quite a few people who said, oh, Martin completely lost me at this point. Oh, come on. Seriously, after Eddard, after the Red Wedding, Martin's famous for this, okay? I get the initial emotional reaction, and maybe that's all it is for people who absolutely love Jon, and I love Jon. But Martin is famous for this, and if you didn't see, that there's gonna be more main character deaths in this series, you haven't been paying attention. However, Jon's not dead. And here's how I can establish this. First of all, the prologue, where we get, I'm blanking on his name, Six Skins, and his first name starts with V or something like that. Varimir or something like that. So Varimir Six Skins, that's what I'll call him, I guess, and hope it's right. He's about to die. And we've seen him before, and he shapeshifts, or not shapeshifts, he takes over another body. And he is like Bran, where he can live inside of the wolves, and he eventually takes over another human. So that prologue is establishing that when someone is about to die and they are a warg, they are able to switch bodies altogether. Okay, then throughout all of Jon's chapters, we start to see him having wolf dreams in the way that Bran has. Melisandre talks to him about, oh, keep your wolf close to you, and establish this skill. And it's established again and again, even in the prologue, that Jon has the gifting to be able to do what Bran's been doing, to shapeshift, to be a warg. And then we establish in the prologue that when a warg dies, it's possible for him to go into a different body. Okay, Jon is going to be in Ghost. That's what's going to happen here. He's not going to stay there, because that would be really lame for his character if Ghost is just running around with Jon. But Jon and Ghost are going to be joined together. He's going to be reborn as Azor Ahai. I have not confirmed this because I need to go back and reread the book, but I was reading, one of the things I was reading online, apparently that Melisandre saw in her flames at one point that Jon was going to be a man first, and then a wolf, and then a man again. Well, that fits this pattern exactly, if that's in fact correct. And I don't have the reference, and I don't recall that myself. I was reading the book pretty fast by the end of it, because I was really just totally into the story. I just wanted to figure out where the plot was going and all this stuff, and I wanted the plot twists and all of that. So I didn't read super carefully on my first reading for some of those, but I'll take, assuming that's true, that Melisandre said that, well, that totally gives it away right there. Jon's not dead. Furthermore, we don't actually see him die, which is always a clue to you, which, by the way, I should talk briefly about Davos at the end of this, which that was a really cool fake out that Martin pulled on us. So, but Jon is going to be back. He's probably going to be reborn as the prince that was promised. That still could be Dany, so that's the part I'm least certain about. But Jon is not done. He's in Ghost right now. He's going to be back as a man at some point, and we have not seen the last of Jon. That could be how he gets out of the Night's Watch and he eventually becomes a Stark, or wherever that story's going. But if you're really upset by that part, I think that maybe look a little bit closer at some of the clues that are in the book leading up to that. I honestly wasn't that shocked. I could kind of see that something was going to lead up to Jon getting killed. And then, when it actually happened, they'd established so much in terms of the clues. I just picked up on it reading the book that Jon's going to be back, and that didn't shock me at all. Okay, so Davos, let me talk about him really briefly, and then we'll wrap this up because I'm sure it's been really long so far. Martin completely sold the fake death there. In Feast for Crows, there's a couple of references to Davos being killed by House Manderley. And so we got to the point, and I forget his name, the head of House Manderley says, bring me his head and his arms or whatever, which is exactly how his death was described in Feast for Crows. And then we don't get a Davos chapter for a really long time. Martin totally sold me that Davos was in fact killed. And I was honestly kind of annoyed, because it was like, well, that was a waste of his character in this volume. He just kind of goes and treats with this lord, he fails, and then he's dead. But no, Davos is not actually dead. Martin faked me out. He's alive, and he's on his way to go find Rickon Stark. So that's going to be really interesting to see where that goes and see what role Rickon still has to play, along with good old Shaggy Dog in here. Other minor things, Stannis is at the Wall for a while. He goes and takes back Deepwood Motte, marches to Winterfell, and then as I mentioned when I was talking about Theon, he is... And he also has Asha Greyjoy as his captive at that point. He takes her at Deepwood Motte, and so he is possibly defeated. Ramsay sends Jon a letter at the right before Jon is killed. He reads it, saying that Stannis has been killed, and that he has Mance Rayder in captivity, and all this great stuff. Which, by the way, the Mance Rayder fake out was another one that completely fooled me, and I love how Martin did that. I don't know what to think of Ramsay's letter. Stannis is not in a good place. I do think Stannis is going to die pretty soon. I don't think he's dead yet. I think Ramsay's too much of a lying SOB, and you really can't believe much of what he says, and I don't think there's a lot of truth in that letter, but we will see. So, that is Dance with Dragons at a very high level. I love the book. I love all of these. Frustrations aside, the book's phenomenal. It's definitely a better read than Feast for Crows. So like I said, they really should be one volume, and together, they're incredible. Here's where I'd rank it in the series. Storm of Swords, hands down my favorite book. Game of Thrones has got to come second. This is not as good as Game of Thrones. It's about on the level of Clash of Kings for me. I know some people don't like Clash of Kings because they think it's really slow. Well, if you don't like Clash of Kings for those reasons, you're probably not going to like this one for the same reasons. Here's the deal with Martin. And it's definitely ahead of Feast for Crows. So I would rank them probably Storm, Game of Thrones, Dance with Dragons, Clash of Kings, and then Feast for Crows. With Storm of Swords being significantly higher than the others and Feast for Crows being significantly lower than the others, so I still really, really enjoy it. Here's the thing about Martin, though, in terms of people complaining about his length. And I've even read some reviews of this saying, oh, well, an editor could have cut this down by 70, 80%. Okay. That's not this type of book. There's some really awesome fantasy novels that are very short and well done. The Earthsea Chronicles, Roger Zelazny's Amber Chronicles. There's some really good stuff out there. If you want to read a short, well-written fantasy novel, you can find it. And it's available to you. That isn't this. This is an immersive experience. And if you don't like reading about everything, all the sights and sounds of what people are eating, and you don't like that full immersive sensory experience, this isn't the series for you. And that's just a preference thing, and there's nothing wrong with not liking that. I get that that's going to drive people nuts. It's a personal preference, but don't sit there and complain that this book isn't shorter when that's not what the book is meant to be. Okay, the entire series is an immersive experience, and you're going to read everything, and some of that's going to be slow. And you either like that or you don't. I love it. I love this type of fantasy when it's done well. Okay, obviously there's books that are immersive and way too long and aren't done well. And yeah, there's parts of this maybe could be cut down. I mentioned Jon's chapters are a little repetitive. Dany definitely needs to get out of Meereen, and she gets a little repetitive. I'm not saying there wouldn't be any room for trimming. But when people start complaining that, oh, all Martin does is he describes food and smells and sights and all this, okay, that's the style of the series. And if you don't like that, you're not going to like the series. So I really don't give that type of complaint too much weight. I get it. It's a personal preference thing. No one says you have to like it. But the book is what it is, and you either enjoy it or you don't. So final rating on this, I would probably rate this one about a 4 to 4.5. I gave it a 5 on my Goodreads account because I love the entire series. I also gave Feast for Crows a 5 on my Goodreads, so realistically, if I was doing a more serious rating of it, it would probably be a 4. This is 4.5. I'd also give Clash of Kings 4.5, and then Game of Thrones and Storm of Swords would both be solid 5-star books in my opinion. So that's kind of where it shakes out, both in terms of, you know, the series as a whole and itself individually. I can't wait for Winds of Winter. I hope it doesn't take 5.5 more years, though. You know what? This book was so good. It was so solid. If that's the time Martin needs, as long as he doesn't die before it's over, that's all I ask. If you think you're going to die, just write faster. Otherwise, if it takes 5 years between volumes, and they're solid, and he's able to wrap the book up in 2 more volumes, I'm good with that. It's awesome fantasy. Storytelling at its best. The characters are incredible. It doesn't get any better than this. If you love deep characters and rich storytelling and unexpected plot twists, and really has some solid things to make you think about and wrestle with in terms of our humanity and the different things the characters are put through, the series is awesome. And if you love Song of Ice and Fire, you're going to love this book. If the series has driven you nuts and it's been too slow for you, you're probably not going to like this one too much. For me, it doesn't get any better than this. Can't wait for book 6, and definitely can't wait for the final, and I hope it is the final one. I don't want the series to stretch on too much, but the final book, book 7, A Dream of Spring is its tentative title. Bring it on, Martin. I want to see more of what you got, and if you got to take a long time to write, that's fine by me, as long as they're awesome volumes, just like this one was. So, that's it. Dance with Dragons, amazing. I am going to go back and do a slower read-through now, probably at the same time as reading Feast for Crows. I read it really fast. I want to go get some more details, but I love that there's a new Song of Ice and Fire book. I love that we have new material to wrestle with and new theories to come up with. If you love this series, you're in heaven right now, because this is awesome. So, that's all from here. This is Ben DeBono for the SciFiChristian.com, signing off.